So this is the country of Bhutan. One of the things that happens with protected areas and conservation, because I think, what we do in our backyards is all well and good, but we somehow need to get coordinated on how all of our backyards fit together into a regional strategy. You've got, hummingbirds that migrate all the way to Mexico, and they got to have nectar, every day. And you got, in this case, this is Bhutan. These are protected areas, and they designed in these corridors so that species like tigers could not be locked into the protected areas and inbreed and lose them. So biological corridors is part of a conservation biology type strategy and very relevant, and it applies to lots of different species. If we want them to be around, we better have a plan to keep them around, because we're basically waving goodbye to almost everything without a plan. It's tragic that that's the case, but there's just not enough habitat that we can rely on, just saying you're on your own and thinking that's going to work out. Very hydrated landscape, just a lot of interesting edge and water, and that's not going to be in any danger of fire anytime soon. I just got a couple of things in here on biomimicry. This is a train, I believe in Japan, designed with the beak of a kingfisher for dynamics, and it's 10% faster, 15% more energy efficient just from that, mimicking piece. This is a termite mound and a natural cooling system applied to buildings. That goes on and on and on. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff in that field of biomimicry if you follow it. I mean, there's like looking at shark skin and the inability of bacterial infections to get established on shark skin and mimicking that for hospital surfaces and things like that. Tons of other things, Velcro. These are just some shots of my garden, integrated trees and gardens and cover crops, the usual stuff, you guys. These are berries. We have, I guess I didn't say this, but we've got 240 acres of land. We've got basically a community land trust where we own the land, but we lease it back to ourselves for life, and then it goes back to a trust. So we did this to get away from speculation, partly. That we saw that the buying land and selling it for more than you bought it for over and over and over again puts pressure on the new buyer that paid more money to do overgrazing, overlogging, to put in too many oil wells, et cetera, et cetera. So we tried to break that with that model. Plus, it's a very powerful cooperative leverage piece. We were able to get independent of the banks and the corporations in 5 years on that land, just between 10 people. And I've got lots of other examples of as little as 10 farms cooperating to get tremendous results. There's a cooperative in, it's a Mennonite, I believe, cooperative of dairies in Virginia, and I watched them, just keep adding new pieces, So it was like 10 dairy farms, standard dairy farms initially, and then, one guy is like really into, or he's, started off, I think, with one of them saying, well, we're losing a lot of money on feed. We're spending a lot of money as a group on feed, so I'm going to make all the feed. So he put in the bins and did all the grinding and put the minerals in, and so they internalized that part of the economics. And then another guy said, well, we're spending a fair amount of money on seed mixes. So I inspected each one of these things, so through the years, so I get to look at all this stuff very closely and the economics of it. And so he started making their own seed mixes, and another guy was really into sorghum. So he, put in a sorghum processing thing on his farm. So then each of the farms started planting, an acre of sorghum, and then they integrated poultry, behind the cows in their rotation, and then they had meat birds and eggs on each farm now. And then another guy wanted to do raw milk cheeses, and so each time they added something, it just got to be more and more interesting. And so now they have these 10 very diversified farms that would have just been pretty much milk only without the cooperative structure, and not to mention all the economic efficiencies of that. So We've really been, I started off saying what this is really, we're regenerating connectivity, communication, community. All these pieces are really important that doesn't necessarily get seen when you're looking at, soil and all the other things that are important and then what's happening in our own connectivity in our own bodies and minds, and connecting your left and right brain and connecting your vagus nerve to your heart. These are all pieces of the connection. So I've got solar thermal and photovoltaic panels, and we'll get to this little biochar gadget in a minute. But I put in a little pond, years ago, just for water, and we had about 8 years of drought, and I just kind of went overboard on water systems. But that little pond is like 18,000 gallons of water, rubber-lined pond, and I can run water into it from springs from across I got 3 hollows that come in together up here, and I can run that full up to somewhere June or July. I can keep it running in spring water. I've got solar pump in the well. I can run the well into it. I've got a Japanese pump in the creek. I can put 10 gallons a minute into it. The nice thing about droughts is that you've got a lot of sunlight. You can turn sunlight into water pumping. And then I've got my gutters that go into it as well. So I can irrigate about 1.5 acres that way. So I've been growing a number of open pollinated corns for years, and there's something dazzling about these multicolored ears because of the just the sheer amount of intraspecific diversity that I mentioned earlier. So corn is an odd example in some ways, but it's an easy one to work with. It's odd meaning that of originally about 20,000 plants that humans use for food. About 20 plants are making up 95% of our global food system, and 5 plants are about 50% of it. One of them is corn. Yeah, but the genetic diversity in it, you can drive from here to Colorado and maybe not even see a seed that you can replant and get the same thing once, let alone something like this. If you knew what you're doing with plant breeding, you could just take those all apart and put them in different piles by color, and then grow them out the next year and select back for that color and back for that color, and eventually get hundreds of distinct varieties from that one. You could not do that with those GMO and hybrid corns. So there's this narrowing of genetics, and the seed companies and the chemical companies have bought up all these seed. I don't know if people have ever read Shattering, the book Shattering by Fowler and Mooney. It's been around for a long time, but it'll seriously piss you off and make you realize why it's so important for us to take back the power of seed saving and selection. To select these things not for bushels per acre, but nutrition per acre, for insect and disease resistance, of specific adaptations to elevation and soil types. All that work needs to be done in every micro-region, so there's full employment possibilities there. Not necessarily economic employment, but at least independence. Anyway, this was a really old popcorn. I actually, out of this variety, got a few ears that were reverted back to not teosinte, but what is it called when each kernel has its own separate husk on the whole ear. So it's a really old corn genetics for that to happen. I mentioned the distribution of centers of diversity of where our food plants come from. They're not evenly distributed. There's real hot spots. In that book, it goes into probably the most powerful chapter in that book is the Russian scientist Vavilov, who trained all these scientists, and he was imprisoned by Stalin, and they were having to, so the potato crop, they couldn't, they had to grow them out, and they're in the siege of Leningrad. They're like running outside to, between the bombs going off to try to harvest the potatoes. But the thing that just makes the hair stand up on your body when you read this story is that these scientists understood the value of the seed so well that they chose to starve to death instead of eating the seed collection, which is just stunning.
Which book is that?
It's called Shattering by Carrie Fowler and Pat Mooney. But it gives you a good sense of the consolidation of seed companies and how the seed companies are buying up all the other seed companies and then just getting rid of the open pollinated stuff and monopolizing on the hybrids that they can control, and then terminator genes and all that stuff, and GMOs could take it to a whole other level, and this unbelievably stupid Impossible Burger. Don't even get me started there. But let's see the next one. So I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Alan Kapuler, but he's a brilliant botanist. And so what this is, you can't read it, but it's an isoproportional bubble map that shows it's a different type of taxonomy. It's a Dahlgren instead of a Linnaean taxonomy. And what it is that the larger the bubble, the more species that are in it, and the closeness of bubbles to each other represents the relationship to each other evolutionarily. But they were looking at a lot of very interesting things early on. One was, so if you have a collection, you could plug them into where they go on this map and kind of get a sense of what your seed collection represents in the botanical world. I mean, maybe saying, well, maybe we have enough Solanaceae at this point, and maybe we should look at these other groups and diversify our collection. That was one. The other thing they were looking at was essential amino acid contents of these plants, that their sense was that when you eat a protein, your body has to exert energy to break that protein up into essential amino acids. And so they were like looking at these composites of sloughs and ferments and different groupings of plants and selecting for higher levels of these things that are ultimately going to be the tissue building nutrition in the diet. So that was one. But the other thing he was saying is that if you look at the disgusting nature of plant patenting and what can be done about it, essentially, if a company takes 10,000 years of spiritual breeding in say corns from Native Americans and then crosses it to a few times and gets to where there's 2 genes unique from the original that can be patented based on the law. Well, he was saying that we can go the other way with that. We can take their varieties and breed them back toward the traits that we actually want and get them to be 2 genes unique. And if there was 10 of us for every plant breeder that was put, and we were just putting them into the public domain after we improved them, that the whole strategy of consolidation and losing genetic diversity would be nullified. Not to say that we could compensate for some of the damage being done by the chemicals and the released genetically engineered crops, like what's happening with the weed. We have different weeds now than we did before, because of the adaptation to pesticides and herbicides. That's a whole other story. Anyway, I just thought I'd toss that in there. So we've been growing this. This is the open. This is the corn that I gave you, and you got it. It's an 8-row flint corn. We love it. It's fantastic, and we've watched it change. Not just the corn, but the pumpkins. We're doing. We think that it originated in the Northeast. Most likely, I'm doing some more work to track it down where it came from, but it's incredible corn for tamales and tortillas and nixtamalizing, which increases numerous nutrients by the way you prepare it. So you're altering, you're selecting at the seed level, then you're doing soil work with minerals and biology, and you're bumping the health of the plant that way, and then finally, we've been doing these workshops that are pretty fun. We'll spend a time, in the morning on the whole seed piece and plant selection. What are we really selecting for and why? And then go out into the field and look at the soil testing and the mineral balancing and the cover cropping and the biology and bumping it there. And then we set up this thing with a table where we'll have a corn sheller on one end, dropping the ears in there and watching the corn get shelled, and then have a pot cooked with alkaline, either lime or ashes, and then have a washed batch and a grinder ground into masa. Masa goes into a tortilla maker, and then we have a biochar stove that's cooking the tortillas with the cobs from the corn and making biochar. And then so it's like literally drop an ear in on this end, and here's a hot tortilla on the other end, and here's the biochar. So growing some of the older wheats. This is a Turkey red. We did some with einkorn. We'd love to get into the perennial wheat that the Land Institute is, what is it, Kernza? Have you tried that?
I just heard about it. I'm into trying it too. We got to get some, yeah.
Yeah, so these are all frontiers that need to be worked on. It's interesting to look at the hope involved in being an early adopter. We're trying to do this with the Stirling engines. We're trying to do it with, numerous pieces of the puzzle here. But when I look back, say 40 years ago, 40, where the organic gardening and farming was and what you could buy off the shelf and on the sophistication of what you can get now is just amazing. Same thing with holistic medicine, the increases in knowledge and availability of holistic medicine. And alternative energy, and the solar panels and inverters and all that world. I mean, you look at those changes in 40 years and then look at how many people really worked on that. It was the early adopters that really made that available to the next people. So there's a tremendous amount of power of getting on that front edge and just, it's not going to be up to speed. You're going to buy it. You're going to be swearing. You're going to be figuring out how to fix it and make it better. But after you do, the next people are going to be able to really tap into that. So it's another point of hope. On this same topic, I was talking to Gary Paul Nabin about 3 years ago, and he was telling me that, which was new to me, but the Appalachian region, it's so diverse and so big, that unlike that real big loss, I didn't mention this, but between 1804 and 1904 in the USDA records, at least 90% of the genetic, of the named varieties are gone in that period of time. And just this huge amount of erosion of every category from, wheat to apples to anything that they measured. So huge amount of loss of genetic information. I should say varieties. We don't really know how many genes were lost in that, right? So in that corn, for example, you might be able to regenerate a tremendous amount of varieties out of that if you got the old stock left to work with and it's not contaminated with some GMO, pollen or something. But he was saying that the Appalachian region went from 5,000 varieties of food plants to 20,000 in 25 years or something. And we were talking about why, and he was saying it's largely because of farmers markets and CSAs, but particularly because of the stories that are told between people. They might be some old variety of, poblano pepper or something that goes into a mole, among people who are preparing ethnic food for that, or an Italian dish, but when there's a story of that you need this variety for that thing, that gets people to save it, to grow it out, instead of just going and saying, well, there's a green pepper in the store and that they're all the same. Anyway, I thought that was another hopeful piece. So we're doing dry beans and corns and pumpkins and winter squashes, things that store a long time, and grains for the, basically a micro food shed of sorts. We're also looking at microgrids to share the excess solar and other energies that we have. You have to invest in a little bit of infrastructure for that. So this row here, this had about 50 pounds of carbonatite on it. You can already see how much bigger. These are identical rows and identical soils, and soils that didn't need anything according to the soil test. But in 35 feet of row here, we got 5.5 bushels of the most amazing deep orange, nutrient dense, no insect pressures, no disease pressures, and they stored I think I had one for 2 years, the shelf life. So all those things are things you want to look at. The smells, the taste, the insect and disease resistance, etc. 5.5 bushels in 35 feet of row compared to 3 bushels right next to it. This year we did something different. I was I would till just ahead of it because this would grow so fast, it just covers up the ground as fast as you can till ahead of it. So there's not really that long time between of having exposed soil. But this year, we put in red clover underneath the corn after the last cultivation. I mean, I'd love to do no-till next, but the red clover came up really nicely underneath of it, and when we picked the corn, it was a good thick stand of red clover, and it came up, went through the winter, and instead of tilling the red clover under, I just tilled strips and planted the pumpkins and squash, and it did fantastic. The best crop we've ever had. I think 1,000 pounds, over 1,000 pounds in 2 rows like that, about 150 feet. These are some of these cool sun hemp mixes, 10 species of cover crops in here. It's dazzling what's happening in the soil as a result of these. They're really fantastic. Sometimes you don't know what to do with them when you get, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't let them grow that tall, but it was just fun to watch it develop.
Sun hemp kills pretty easy and gives you long-lasting coverage. It takes a long time to rot away, so it's a great one for that kind of stuff.
We just threw seed into it for the winter and then mowed it off. And then the following spring, when we tilled it under, there was the most amazing amount of mycelium. I mean, some fungi just love that.
Well, it's slower carbon. It doesn't go away as fast, and that's with a lot of our cover crops. The problem is, especially if we're flail mowing them and if we're tilling them in, the bacteria eat them all up. The fungi just get starved out. This kind of stuff sticks around, and they get to feed on it. And so, if you grow that stuff, it's real woody. The stem is quite woody.
This was an extremely impressive stand of Austrian winter peas. I mean, these were like bright green in the middle of February, and the sweetest thing I've ever tasted out of the garden. And you could pick, lots of it in February, and it was cold that year. But the corn crop we got after this, we tilled that in. I didn't even think I could till it. I thought I was just going to get stuck in the first 10 feet, but it just tilled in really nicely, and we got a fantastic corn crop that year. Oh yeah, you can see the red clover under the corn here. So we're doing these naked seeded pumpkins. Have you guys doing any of those yet?
Haven't done them recently. Did them a long time ago, but I'm thinking about doing more of them. Yeah.
Yep, I was talking to Will Bonzel about the genetics on it and where we need to go with the next plant selection, because these are fairly space hungry, for the amount of yield you get. There's some bush varieties, but they need selecting work. But really good oil production and incredible zinc, and basically most of the nutrients from any tree nut, and you just break them open and then reach in and handfuls of food right now without having to do any hulling. So it's a great crop.
So maybe something to consider is the problem with coons out in the corn is growing those in amongst the corn. Because I've heard and I believe from having walked in it in large patches with shorts on that it's just too much for the coons. All those squash that you really do feel the impact. I mean, a little bit doesn't bother you, but if you're in a lot of it.
We need to do that too, because now that we have like these higher bricks crops, the animals are, what you see is the insects and disease go in the rearview mirror, and the animals come out of everywhere like you've never seen before, because they're attracted to nutrition. The insects and diseases are attracted to sickness. So yeah, just apples. So yeah, we're just growing a lot of different things, and we do tabling. We have a pawpaw festival, and just showing people about the nutrient-dense food thing and how to measure it and what minerals and soil balancing.